Courtney?
Sure.
Already? Okay. Remember, our after-meeting meeting is at, will be immediately after the meeting at the Cambridge Brewery. And normally we'd like to get a head count so we know how many seats that usually we can I've converged on them after the meeting that we had Linus. And we converged on them, and they were crowded. And it took myself, Mad Dog, John, and Linus to get ourselves a table. It was an interesting group.
We did a pretty good crowd there.
Yeah. So we didn't catch it. And I called ahead. So anyway, the Cambridge Brewery is just up on Hampshire Street, just a couple blocks away from here. And, several of the people in the leadership of this group drink only Coke or something else like that. I'll drink a wine. It's amazing. This group is not big drinkers. We don't go through a lot of pictures here. I don't know, with the Metro West group here.
We do.
Might have to pay in advance. Anyhow. Anyway, I'd like to introduce Courtney Eckhardt. Courtney is going to be talking about Postfix, which is an alternative to SendMail as a mail transport agent, or MTA. Not it's very relevant here for those of us who grew up in Boston with the MTA. And became Charlie's at various times. We just cut over to a new server. The old Boston Linux server is sitting right here, getting cannibalized by John, and the case is going to Randy Hoffland, who should be showing up shortly. So, and in converting over, we brought up Red Hat 7.1 with Postfix, and we're using Mailman as our list manager. Still have the passion. Sorry. We haven't figured a way to transport John up to Belmont. There's a place up in Belmont called McLean's. So, anyway, at that lousy joke, I'll turn the meeting over to Courtney. We also have some O'Reilly direct catalogs here. Feel free to take them.
Dim the light a little bit so we can see the screen a bit better.
Sure.
Sure, it doesn't normally.
Perfect. That's good. No. That's good. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, what did you use to do the slides?
Was that?
What did you use to do the slides?
Star Office.
Yeah, standard back.
Yeah, it's one of theirs. It was the one that looked least tacky.
That works.
Something that looked, sort of soothing. Okay, so I'm Courtney, as Samantha said, and I have tried to put the presentation in order of sort of practical things first and theoretical internals of the software later. I can go into greater or lesser depth in configuration and internals and whatever people here like. Speak up if you have a question at any point. And we come to the end and there's extra time. Tell me what you're interested in and I'll try and cover that some more. Okay. Why would you like to use Postfix? Besides the fact that I tell you to. It's fast. It can serve on a desktop PC, and when this was written, this was probably written a year or so ago, so let's say a Pentium 400. It can serve about 1 million different messages a day. That's distinct, which is pretty spiffy. It's pretty secure. It takes a leaf from Qmail in not having a single executable like SendMail does, but having lots of little executables that are semi-transient. and will do one specific task a configurable number of times and then exit and start up the instance. It's mail compatible from the outside for the most part. Your users should not see a huge difference between Postfix and mail, and therefore probably Postfix and Gmail. It's easier to use than Zenmail. You don't have to deal with the ugly Zenmail.cf. It's much faster to configure. It has better documentation than Qmail does. Qmail's documentation is miserable. There's lots of things that tell you what to do to set up your Qmail server, and very few that tell you why you should do it that way. So, it was written by this fellow, whose name I can't quite say right, because it has sounds that are not used in English, which is my native language. If you're interested in hearing how to say his name, he has a WAV file that you can download from his website, which is him saying his name. It was developed by him while he was on sabbatical with IBM. In 1998.
Where is this guy from?
I think, I'm guessing Polish, but I'm not sure.
No, I think it's German.
German? Okay.
It could be Austrian.
So, what was his website?
Yeah, listen to what he says on his website. There's a link to it from postfix.org, which is the Postfix site. It was released as free software in 1998 as the secure mailer. IBM was originally going to call it Cmailer, but found that that was too close to a currently registered trademark. So they named it the secure mailer initially and then renamed it to Postfix. I have not found any documentation about how they chose the name Postfix. It's released under the Secure Mailer license, which is also known as the IBM Public License. This is free software. GNU says so. I think it's copyleft, but you know, I don't really understand the license, so don't quote me. It is not compatible with the GPL for purposes of merging code because it in fact requires that you give more rights away than the GPL requires. There are some patent rights tied up with the IBM public license that the GPL does not address. So general information on how you get it and what you can do with it. It runs on nearly any Unix your little heart desires, especially if it's a more modern version, but older versions probably do. It runs on Linux. It does not run on Windows. People have been making noises about porting it to Windows. And the maintainer is very, very doubtful about this.
Why would anyone want Postfix running on Windows when you have such a great mailing system like Exchange?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe because Postfix is cheaper.
We're missing all those important features like the blue screen.
I don't know, man. What are you going to do?
He's not certain.
Still has to say why we want it on Windows. We have a Linux box.
I don't know why you would want it on Windows. The maintainer doesn't think you'd want it on Windows either. But you know, I'm not sure about that. I think we should send an email and they can look into it. It is distributed as source at postfix.org. If you want binaries, I recommend you look at your local distribution. Red Hat has some. I think Red Hat and SUSE have the most current binaries. Debian's for stable are somewhat out of date, but still usable. I'm not sure what testing looks like right now.
Oh, one thing I'd like to throw in here. When I was setting up the new boot.org server, I installed the RPM packages from Red Hat and Postfix, and it just wouldn't work. And I eventually gave up and installed the source, and it worked right out of the box and everything else.
Okay, I have not installed it from binaries. I installed it from source. There is, in fact, an entire Red Hat back on how you make Red Hat work with Postfix. And I have not read that because I don't run Red Hat, so I think it was very useful. But as I go further, maybe you'll be able to understand what went wrong. I'm not sure.
I think the RPM is just more file grid.
That seems entirely possible.
It seems I've found that things that you've had problems with under Red Hat, I've been able to install under SUSE with absolutely no problem. I think there's a little difference. I think even though Red Hat's more popular, I think SUSE tends to be a little bit more stable.
Vegan stage is not super popular. At least I tried a couple. You can just apt get, update, install, and I grade refresh every night.
It's my favorite distribution.
Yeah.
The more Charlie's. So, some of the things that you need to do with Postfix that you may not need to do for other things. It's sort of like Apache this way. It wants its own user. This should not be a user that you can log in as. It just should be a user that has very few privileges, so that if somebody does do something nasty to your Postfix system somehow, there's very little that Postfix can splash. So, it's just an example of mine. Make sure that the user Postfix is alias to root, which is hopefully alias to a real person, so if something goes wrong, you get some mail. Move the sendmail binary, the new aliases binary, and mailq binary to backup versions. And the reason to do this is so that you can run your Postfix installation but still have the old binaries there, so you can do things like clear your queue and make sure there's nothing stuck under your old system before you ever move it. If you do that, however, and you install sendmail or qmail or whatever you've got right there right now, from binaries, you might have problems because the packaging system might complain that it can't remove the original binaries. You might have to remove the binary. So there is a little security issue that you should decide before you go to the actual installation. Postfix uses a mail drop directory, which local mail is posted directly to. The sendmail binary from Postfix takes mail from your mail program and dumps it in the mail drop directory so that the other parts of Postfix can deal with it. You can have this world readable or world writable. I'm sorry. Yes, I did not correct that. World writable or group owned. If you have it group owned, then part of Postfix needs to be set GID. Now, the maintainer of Postfix thinks this is a really, really, really bad idea. So by default, the mail drop directory is world writable. This does allow users to do some potentially obnoxious stuff, but there should be very little they can do that could actually crash the system or crash Postfix or cause junk mail to be delivered to cause your Pine building to fall on the floor. There's a very, very small chance that any piece of random garbage dumped in the mailbox, the mail drop directory will be recognized by Postfix as an actual legitimate Q file, because the format is very, very specific and the data is not trusted. So if you leave it world readable, then you don't have to use set GID stuff, which means that if something happens to your Postfix installation, you will probably have more security against the rest of your hard drive being corrupted. But if you have a lot of users, you may wish to use the set-GID. Make sure that you create a special group that shares its group ID with no other groups and no other users for the purpose. The source comes with a script, install.sh. It asks you some questions, answer the questions. The defaults are fairly sensible and are somewhat architecture dependent. If there's interest and we have time, I can run it in a dummy, as a user, so you can see what it asks. At least for Linux, the default is to use user sbin sendmail. However, there are some programs that want user lib sendmail. So you should probably make sure that either one of those two is binary and the other of those two is assimilated to the binary. I found out that mail on my system was not working because there was no user lib sendmail after I installed Postfix. So you learned when I, could not spam me with 1,000 messages about how I now owed the tax service money. There are example scripts in the source for you to run most of Postfix through it, should you like to do so. This is recommended. It does not come that way by default, however, so if you want to do that, then you can look at what's provided to help you figure out how. There are a few, but only a very few, mandatory edits you must make to the configuration files. There are two configuration files that you'll mostly have to deal with. They will be in empty Postfix. One of them is called main.cf, and one of them is called master.cf. master.cf is used by the Postfix master daemon, which is called master, which is what monitors the rest of the Postfix processes. It starts up new processes, it kills them when they're too old, it makes sure everything stays running. Main.cf is where you do most of your configuration for, what's the name of my machine, who am I sending mail as, who am I receiving mail from. The parameters are set with equals and used with $, sort of like a shell variable. My origin is one of the things you need to set. If you set it to be your host name, then it will send mail as user at your host name, like cme@panzer.consistent.org, that's this machine. If I set it, though, to be consistent.org, then it would send mail as cme@consistent.org. It depends on if you were trying to send mail from your local machine as if you were...
Is that similar to sendmail's masquerade function?
I believe so. I don't know
Yes.
very much about sendmail because I learned Postfix, but...
Yes.
Okay, my destination, the other thing you want to set. This tells Postfix who it should be accepting mail for. You can set it as just your host name and local host at your domain, and that will accept mail only for this one computer. And if you add to that the entirety of the domain, then it will accept any mail sent to that domain, and that's if you have like a domain-wide mail server. So, let's say we have a workstation that we're putting in a domain. It wants to be able to send mail. It wants to be able to receive mail for itself, but the domain-wide mail server should also receive mail for the entire domain. So we want Panzer here to take mail for panzer.consistent.org, but something else is going to take consistent.org's email. So on the workstation, you would set my origin equals my domain. And on the server, you would set the same thing, but also that the destination includes the domain as well as the local machine. I should note that the parameters I'm telling you to set here are the ones that you actually have to go in and change in the main.cf, because the default values are good for most circumstances. So I will be telling you the ones that need to be flipped. If you have a null sign, then you want your origin to be your domain, and you want to send your mail to a mail server somewhere. So the server handles getting it where it wants to go. You set relay host, and if you set it to my domain, then that assumes that you have DNS service and that there's an MX record. And in the master.cf, you want to comment out the entry that runs an SMTP daemon that was listening for mail, and you want to comment out the local delivery agent because you're not accepting any mail yourself. You are assuming that the users will get it via POP or IMAP or something off the mail server. If you are inside an internet or a firewall, and the gateway is going to be feeding mail inside and out, then set my origin again. And once again, if there's internal DNS with an MX record, then use relay host equals my domain. Otherwise, you have to hard code the relay host to a specific machine name and disable DNS lookups. Otherwise, Postfix will be hunting for a DNS server that isn't there. Which doesn't disable it, it just slows things down. So if you want to do that and enable direct local delivery, so from my machine to some other machine without going through the firewall and relaying through mail servers and things like that, then you need to set up a separate file, which is called Postfix transport. These are your transport maps. Postfix does a lot of things that sendmail would do in sendmail.cf with extra maps and files that you can load optionally if you decide you need them. Set my.domain to SMTP, so that means anything here, send it by SMTP. My domain. The second entry on the list, sorry, double talking, you also need to set to SMTP. And then you need to special case your own name and localhost, because otherwise Postfix will complain that you're looping mail. And you don't want that to happen. It makes your Postfix upset, it makes your system administrators upset. Something like that. And then in main.cf, you need to add a reference to this transport map you've just created, so that Postfix will know that it has to look at this outside file. It doesn't need to do that by default, because default setup is very simple. Okay, so if you've got your machine's happily trading mail behind the firewall needs some sort of setup so that it can handle the mail coming in and going out. You need to set up a transport map again to deliver mail to the relevant internal machines, maybe one or more. So you could have, Courtney's mail goes to Panzer, Jeff's mail goes to Jeff's machine, or you could have all of the mail go to the mail server. And you modify this line as is appropriate. That's SMTP : and then whatever machine you want it to go to. So if you want to allow local machines to send mail anywhere, to any machine, but you want machines outside your firewall to only be able to send to user@domain and not user@machine.domain, then you need this complicated looking bit of stuff. This is all in the main.cf. You set origin, destination, transport maps, because you're calling the line we just talked about above. You need to tell it what networks it considers good, trusted, and local. That's what the My Networks line does. Tell it who us is, and anyone who isn't us is them. And the next line, the SMTP recipient restrictions, permit My Networks, that means let them do whatever they want, of course, and reject everybody else. And for local transport, we're going to return an error, because we're not delivering mail to ourselves on the gateway. We're delivering mail to either a mail server or to individual machines. So, if you've got a machine and you've got dial-up, I'm sorry. So let's say, dial-up, you're probably not connected all the time, because some of the time you might be using that for a phone. So you don't want Postfix to be trying to tell your PPP daemon, okay, let's dial up. Every time you send an email, you want a batch process, probably, so that you can send everything all at once and not be dialing up 15 times a day. So what you need to do is set the relay host again, so that when you do dial up, the mail gets sent off to your ISP's mail server, which then deals with delivery, so that you don't have to be logged in until all your messages are delivered. And to keep Postfix from dialing you up, then you want defer transports equals SMTP. So that means save my SMTP transports, don't send them all the time. And then you want to add commands to your PPP or split dial-up scripts to cause the queue to be manually cleared when you dial up. And I will talk about what those are in a little bit, but basically you just want to say flush the queue and keep trying until you try all the messages. Okay, so some configuration odds and ends. Postfix, by default, is sort of annoying, fills your logs with some confusing messages. It tries every time it receives a message to send a notification to any BIF clients that might be listening saying, you got mail. And if there's no BIF clients listening and there's no ComSat service running in INetD, I don't know much about the ComSat service, but that's what Postfix is trying to talk to. It will then send to your syslog, I couldn't tell anybody they got mail. And it will do this constantly. So to keep that from happening in main.cf, all you have to do is put BIF equals no. Then it will stop trying to notify anybody, and you will stop getting error messages. No logs for that. The other thing it will do by default is check for NIS maps, Network Information Services, every so often. You get a lot of ugly, can't find NIS messages in your logs, which, if you don't have NIS, you don't care. So you set alias maps equals alias database, which is sort of, what I'm looking for. It's sort of cryptic on the surface of it. But basically, you're telling Postfix that the only maps you should be looking for are the ones that are local to this machine. So don't look for NIFs. We haven't got any NIFs. I've given you the entire list of things you should look for, and don't look for anything else. And by default, Postfix will accept mail for pretty much anybody, because it doesn't check immediately whether or not that person actually has an account on your machine. Because there are little separate bits of Postfix, so you have to tell a couple of bits of Postfix to do things if you want that checked. To cause Postfix check, then you set the local recipient maps variable, and you set it to alias maps, which is probably your aliases, and whoever's in your password file. If you've got Postfix rooted, on some systems this will require a copy of your password files in the root jail. You have to try it and see what your system requires. Okay, so let's say, this is a fairly common thing you want to do, you want to send mail as user@domain, for the most part. But you also want some users to receive mail. Like, you want root sent to this machine. You don't want it sent to the mail server and then sent back to you. So set my origin as above. And then you need to set up virtual maps, which is sort of like the transport maps we talked about earlier. And etc postfix virtual is the file you want. In that file, then you put who's going to receive mail locally. So root, and where it goes, root at localhost, and postmaster probably, and anybody else you want to as well. And this will keep your root email from, your syslogs from being sent off to some mail server somewhere, so that you can then take it back both times across the secure network. Postfix commands. Postfix commands are for the most part pretty simple and intuitive. It's great. Postfix start tells it to run. Postfix stop tells it to stop. Isn't that great? Postfix reload tells it to reload main.cf and master.cf. Postfix flush flushes the mail queue. This is the sort of thing you want to have in your PDP script. There is an example of script in the Postfix stack on the website if you are interested. Mail queue works like it does with SendMail and tells you what's in the mail queue right now. It's just a symlink. When the SendMail binary is called as mail queue, that's what it returns. New aliases. You probably all know about new aliases. You have to run it for Postfix just like you have to run it for SendMail. Postmap, and then the name of the map file will reload what's in the map. So that's what you have to do when you change etc postfix transport, etc postfix virtual. I think those are the only external maps that Postfix uses right now. So postfix reload will not reload the map files automatically. You also have to run postmap map file. If you type postconf and then there's bunches of options for it, man postconf if you're interested, you can find out some interesting things about the internals of your Postfix system while it's running. Things like what it's configured to send where and what version you have. What it thinks it's doing right now. Okay, the internals of Postfix. Postfix is, as I said before, not one executable, it's many little executables. Each of the executables inside Postfix has a single task that it performs. It performs it a configurable number of times, and then is killed and a new instance is started up. This is to keep memory leaks down and keep things from being easily exploited. This means that if you are trying to get into the system through Postfix, you have to go through 1, 2, 3, I think maybe 4 layers of demons before you actually get to something that can exploit interesting parts of the hard drive. The entire system is controlled by the daemon called master, which reads what's in master.cf, Master.cf mostly consists of lines telling master which smaller services you want to run. Like, I don't want to run SMTP and I don't want to run local delivery because I'm handing everything off to a mail server and I'm not accepting mail myself. This means that you can turn off things that you don't want. You can also substitute your own programs for parts of the Postfix system, mostly for the external ones that either handle SMTP or local delivery, that sort of thing. But there is probably going to be some provision at some point for replacing the internal programs as well that trade mail back and forth between them. One of the nice things about Postfix is that it doesn't trust anything. It doesn't trust mail submitted to it by a user. It doesn't trust mail coming to it from the internet. It doesn't trust inter-process communication. It doesn't trust FIFOs. It is very, very, very careful and checks all of its data so as to avoid buffer overruns and interesting exploits and just general badness. So, there are 4 different queues that Postfix recognizes. Mail drop, which we already talked about, which is the directory that mail from the system comes into. Incoming, active, and deferred. So first, you send a mail, it goes to mail drop. There are some things that fob it, some preliminary address rewrites, that sort of thing. And then it goes to incoming, where it waits to go to active. Incoming is where things sit, so that the active queue is very, very small. The reason for it to be small is that the active queue is the only one where all of the relevant data about a message is loaded in memory. Postfix tries very, very, very hard to not overload your memory under any circumstances, so that the bulk of your email is sitting on the hard drive instead of being in memory and taking up resources and plugging down your machine. Deferred is for non-deliverable mail, and attempts to deliver things from deferred are handled by an exponential backoff. So we try, we wait, we try again, we wait a little longer, we try again, we wait a little longer. And the idea is to not keep the active queue full of messages that are continually trying to be delivered even though they're not going to go through. And the active queue accepts messages alternately from incoming and from deferred, so that even when traffic is very, very heavy, new messages still get through and old messages still get tried. It tries to strike a balance between trying to push out the old messages and letting the new messages through. Okay, more information. Postfix.org, the homepage, more information. That should be easy to understand. There's up-to-date copies of the FAQ, all the HTML documentation, all the man pages. That's where you can get the term wall, as well as some of the author's commentary on why he did things the way he did, and where he took inspiration from, most notably Apache and Qmail. The file called install in the source tarball, it goes through and talks about basically what I did, about things you want to decide before you install the system. There is a Red Hat Postfix FAQ I mentioned to Jabber, which is how to make Red Hat and Postfix cohabit. I have not looked over it myself, but it's linked to the Postfix site. Somebody went and wrote a how-to on Postfix SMTP authentication, and I haven't looked at that either, but it seemed like it could be useful if you are looking to authenticate your own SMTP. Postfix with Mac OS X and IMAP, which Postfix does not do POP or IMAP natively. You have to have it work with either a POP or an IMAP daemon. So there's one article on how to do it. There's a very specific how-to, Red Hat 7.1 plus Courier Mail Drop for handling local delivery, and Courier IMAP, which the person who wrote it prefers it to UW IMAP. And eventually, my synopsis of this presentation will be up on my site, probably in about a week. So, at this point, I ask you what you want to know more about. I can actually run the install script for you as a user, so they won't do anything, just so you can see what it does. I can pull up the Postfix website, and we can look at diagrams and things about how a message moves in more depth. I can pull up the website, and we can look at the more advanced configuration topics. And I can show you my own configuration files if you're interested. Yes?
Webman to configure Postfix?
I'm sorry, Webman?
Webman.
I have not. I have not tried Webman.
What was your URL?
Which URL?
Yours. Said that you were going to post.
Oh, okay. www.consistent.org/CME.
That's up on our website.
Which directory has to be worldwide?
The mail drop directory, which I think is var school postfix or var school postfix mail drop.
Now, wouldn't it be able, a malicious user be able to create a hard link to a file in that directory
That's
and
one of
cause it to get multiply delivered?
Multiply
constantly?
delivered, yes, that's one of the things that can happen. It's a trade-off. You can either allow that sort of thing to happen, hope that your users won't, or you can set your ID privileges. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, one question I had, I spoke to them earlier. One of the things I want to do in BLU.org is to have a few addresses in BLU.org be different domains. For instance, the guy that runs the calendar, Al Sherman, would like his address to be at bugc@bugc.org, which is one of our virtual domains. And that's not going to be, that doesn't use mailman.
Right, okay. You can do that. Let me cause it to back up a little bit. You can do that with a virtual maps file. And I didn't...
Yeah, it's already set up and working.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, I know. I wanted to get a little bit of a... of course, bugc@blu.org isn't. I don't know why it's bouncing.
Oh, you didn't ask me to set it up.
I didn't set it up. I set up the account. It's a normal account. Just for some reason, it doesn't work. I sent you the bounce on that.
Okay, you didn't see that yet.
Yeah. Look at it. Okay.
Okay, you can do that with the virtual maps file. I have not done it myself, but if you're interested, we can go to the web browser and have a look at.
We'll see if other people want, because I can do that myself. I know John has it set up for his Abreau accounts.
It took me an hour and a half to get Postfix installed on this machine, and an hour of that was trying to figure out why on earth XIM was still delivering email for me. It turns out that my mail client was invoking XIM directly, and so I was still getting email through XIM, and Postfix was never seeing it. I eventually said, well, heck with this, there's nothing in my queue, I'm going to just punt XIM entirely, and Postfix started working because XIM was sort of in play. But I think it took me about 15 minutes to go through the necessary edits to the configuration file. I was very impressed.
Terry, did you add bugc.org as one of the local delivery domains?
No, my question was bugc@blu.org. It's broken.
You created user bugc.
Yeah, that's Al Sherman. I don't know why that bounced. Just a regular account. That used to be ConeCal. So, anyway, we look at that.
Actually, I think what I had to do when I created a user, I had to actually create a zero-line file in the mail school.
Yeah, I'll do that. Okay.
I was wondering if you or anybody else knows the pros and cons of Postfix versus Qmail besides documentation. Because there is documentation for Qmail, it's just really, really, really hard to find, and you got to dig a lot.
Yes. Some people would consider a major con of Qmail to be DJB himself. While the maintainer of Postfix is also a big wheel in the security movement, he wrote Satan, among other things. He is not generally considered, I don't believe, to be quite as psychotic as a lot of people consider DJB to be. I know a lot of people who refuse to use SendMail because they don't like DJB. Another... I'm sorry, I did, Qmail. Qmail is what I meant, I'm sorry. Another pro for Postfix versus Qmail is the distribution, because Qmail has limited distribution even if it's licensed. Yeah. And you know, there's the great license debate again, which the Postfix license is a little bit more free than the Qmail license.
That's why I changed it.
What are the cons of the Qmail license? I don't know what license it's under.
It's under one of DJB's own. It's similar to the, I think it's the same as the one that DJBS is, is distributed under. As far as I remember, I don't remember it very well, so maybe somebody else here can correct me if they remember better. DJB needs to be the one distributing the program. So you can't rebundle it as binaries, you can't rebundle it with your patches, it needs to come from him.
Can't change the file.
I'm sorry?
Can't change the file, you have to send it to him.
Yeah.
And he can accept it or not.
Right. He can either add what you submit to the source himself, or you can distribute your patch separately, but you can't redistribute Qmail with your changes. And the reason he did that, as far as I know, is that he has very firm ideas about what is secure and what isn't, and he wants his program to be known to be really, really, really secure. And if you go around adding random code to Qmail and then you go redistribute it and there's a hole, it makes him look bad. Which in some ways is a reasonable enough opinion. On the other hand, it makes it really hard to do anything custom to software. And that means every time that you download a new tarball, you have to reapply all the patches that you wanted applied to it and compile it. This pisses a lot of people off.
It's the same problem we used to have with Linux before it's like the Linux growth.
Yes, exactly. A possible pro for Qmail, however, is that it could. I don't know of any exploits for either Postfix or Qmail, but Qmail sacrifices more configurability than Postfix does to be more secure. So there are some things that Qmail does not let you do by design, and the reason is that DJB considers this to be an insecure thing to want to do.
And Qmail uses setuid for the...
A setuid, yes.
Right, versus...
One other, that reminded me, one problem that you can have, especially with Red Hat because it uses Linux Conf, and I think Susan was also mentioned, Linux Conf thinks your sendmail binary should be setuid. For Postfix, it should not be. So Linux Conf will go merrily around changing your sendmail binary to be setuid every time you change it back. And there's a couple of workarounds in the fact of that if you want them, if you don't want it to be setuid.
I thought Red Hat wasn't using that anymore.
It may not be. The last Red Hat I used was 6.2.
Ah, okay.
So...
SUSE does a different, SUSE uses a different configuration, but it does not use Linux Conf.
Okay. Ah, interesting, okay. Okay, yeah, I haven't used any of the seven releases. That was a known problem, and I think the fact also mentions that some versions of SUSE do the same thing with their own configuration utility. So there are user
SUSE uses YAST configuration.
Okay.
You can configure, you can actually go in and actually tell it not to do it.
Right, yeah. There was a listing on the website for how you do that. Which I don't remember myself because I didn't. Are there any other questions I can answer?
Well, how hard is it to upgrade? As opposed to reinstalling the version?
I don't. There are patches and diffs on the Postfix website. I don't think I have upgraded mine in a while. The most recent release, I believe, was in 2000. I'm using one from 1999. There have been a couple of configuration options added since then. I don't think I've tried, actually, upgrading it.
The reason I mention is I noticed on one of the diamonds 2 days ago, there was a new security patch.
For Postfix?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I haven't tried.
In terms of resources, how well behaved is it?
Postfix tries its best to be very well behaved. The number of every type of process running at a time is configurable. The number of times that process executes its task and then exits is configurable. The number of concurrent deliveries is configurable. Postfix is certainly capable of doing many, many concurrent deliveries and running thousands of processes if you wanted to. There are, in fact, questions about possible difficulties with running many Postfix processes and the kernels of various operating systems and how they could react badly.
This is all configurable in master or
This is all configurable in master. Yes. Master controls how the process is run, and main is what data they use. It's an easy way to remember it. Postfix also follows an interesting model for concurrent deliveries to a domain that has been down. Say AOL goes down, they're down for a day, they come back up, Postfix notices it comes back up, delivers a mail, delivers another mail, and it watches how fast the other server can respond to its delivery attempts, and will keep upping them gently and gradually until the point where the other server is sort of saturated with connections from it, at which point it will back off. The reason for the active queue being so small is to keep your local resources from being used up as well. I have had no performance problems with it in terms of it taking up lots of resources. I don't send lots of mail either, but there's a section on the website about how the maintainer has tried to build it to not saturate their machines.
We used to have a big problem with that on the old server.
Yeah.
On one of Jerry's lists, this huge list of users, it was the mail wasn't working right. We'll find all mail backed up behind that. It was
yeah.
every 2 or 3 times a day, I have to do SSHJ and then fire up a dozen different sendmail processes to run the queue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fast bubbles and nuts.
Yeah, that's one reason for the deferred queue working the way it does with Postfix, is the back off so that it doesn't use up your resources continually trying to deliver mail. One thing to note is that by default it does not send a 4-hour warning. This message has been undeliverable for 4 hours. You turn this on if you like to. There's a fact question about it, but that because it keeps retrying your message in a sensible way, that is not the default to send you a warning. Who did I see first? I don't know who I saw first. Scar? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Yes, you can. You say, send a warning after, and then you give it a number, and that's 1 hour. 4 is just the default for send mail. So you can set any number you want.
One of the things I just found out was that the incoming mail folder, var spool mail, John mentioned a few minutes ago that you have to initialize the incoming mail folder. It could be 0 length, so all you have to do is touch it, change on it, and as long as it's there, you can deliver mail to it. If you don't have it in your var spool mail, that user will not receive mail.
Okay, that's something that I haven't realized. You have to do that for new aliases too. If you don't have new aliases, or I'm sorry, SE aliases, when you install Postfix, you should just touch it so that it's there.
Oh, is that what it is?
It does. It uses etsy aliases just like Zenmail does.
I just assumed it was just working on their Etsy post things.
It looks for aliases and etsy aliases, but the configuration files are in Postfix.
If you get up to
You could take a look at back or something like that.
Sure.
Do you have the local bus for a second?
Sure.
That takes note for enough.
Swap the tape, sure.
Okay.
What's all day?